let's dive straight in, shall we, and speak to the Shadow Justice Minister, Kieran Mullan. Good to see you this morning, Mr. Mullan. And can I start by asking you about stories that have been emerging over the weekend of senior Tories talking to the papers? They want to see Boris Johnson back in the fold. They want to see him return. They say he's the only man who can take on Nigel Farage. Do you think Boris Johnson is the route to Conservative recovery? You've been fourth in the polls this week.
I don't think that's a conversation I've been having with any of my colleagues. I think what we're focused on is what the public want us to be focused on, which is providing a critical opposition to Labour and all the damage that they're doing to our economy and our country, and putting forward our own policies and alternative positions. I think one of the messages I got from the last election was that the public wanted us to be focused on doing our jobs and not briefing and leaking and all that sort of stuff. And so I think anything like that is just not a helpful contribution to make. And I'd urge any colleagues who are talking to the press about those sorts of things, as much as I know you guys want to talk to us about that sort of thing, it's not helpful. And I'm focused on getting the job done.
Yeah, and of course we saw those fishermen, the boats detained the other day, part of that EU reset deal the other week, which your party leader, Kemi Badenoch, branded a betrayal. What would have you done differently, having been in office, to help grow the economy?
Well, we wouldn't have brought in this jobs tax, which is destroying growth in our economy. You remember that Labour inherited the fastest growing economy in the G7 from us, with inflation below target, and what they've ended up doing is driving growth into the wall, and now it's creaking back, and the long-term projections are that it's lower than it would have been under us. And the jobs tax is a perfect example. If you're an employer right now, not only are you having to think about who you can retain, you're certainly not in a position to bring on new people, and at the same time you've got the threat down the line of Labour's plans to make it even harder to run a small business when it comes to employment rights, employment law, which of course we want fair and reasonable employment law, but employers that I speak to already find that quite burdensome, and Labour are threatening to take that even further. I don't think there's a single major business that supports those ideas. These are the kind of things that drive down growth, that mean we have less taxes to pay for our public services. It's disastrous for us all as public service users.
But what about these tit-for-tat operations that we're seeing take part in the English Channel at the moment? How do we stop that? Because there are a lot of people pointing to the very obvious fact that the French are somehow allowing small boats to make their way across the English Channel, but clearly they are able to seize boats when they want to.
I think the reset with the EU, as it's been described, for me, just sent all the wrong signals about the willingness of this country to stand up for itself, to make sure we get treated fairly. I'll take one example, the idea that now again, the ECJ, the European Courts of Justice, are going to be in charge of disputes that we have with the EU. Other countries ask for mutual recognition, for independent resolution of disputes. Those are the things that we would have demanded, and we wouldn't have made any deal that didn't include that. When Starmer backs down, just for the sake of the headline, I think, it sends all the wrong signals to our European partners. We want to be treated with respect. We're not a supplicant. Just because we've gone our own way doesn't mean that we shouldn't stand up for ourselves.
Yeah, what is the Conservative Party going to do now? I mean, as Ellie said at the start there, you're fourth in some polls. You seem to be losing ground on the right to reform. You're not winning the centre ground on the left. Labour's moving into a much tougher stance on things like justice. We saw some policies announced just last week about that. How are you going to win back your voters?
Well, can I just really pick up on that point about Labour being tougher on justice? I'm afraid they absolutely are not doing that. As a Shadow Justice Minister, we looked at that in detail. What they're actually going to do is let out some of the worst offenders in our society, rapists, child abusers, people that kill people, even earlier. So they're not being tough on justice.
But they're saying they're only doing that, just to be clear, they're only doing that because the Conservative government, after 14 years, only built 500 extra prison spaces. They're saying you left them in a crisis, and therefore they're having to pick up the pieces.
Well, let's be clear. There are many other ways that they could tackle that problem. We have thousands of extra people in remand in our prisons at the moment, almost 7,000 more than we normally do because of the Crown Court backlogs. And at the same time, they're not taking all the additional days they could be for getting that backlog down in our courts. There are thousands of extra foreign offenders in our prisons. There could be emergency sittings at weekends. There's all sorts of things that they could do rather than let out the very worst offenders from our prisons earlier. I think that's the wrong wrong choice to make. And those are the kind of decisions that we would do things differently that I think in the long run are going to secure support. Listen, Kemi's been very clear. It's a long road back for us. There's a lot of work we have to do to rebuild trust. But what we're not going to do is, like Labour and actually reform, make promises for things that are just not realistic. We've already heard Nigel Farage talk about the two-child benefit cap, that he's going to give that, take that away. That's an extremely expensive policy. How's that going to be paid for? We're not just going to tell people what they want to hear to get back power, because that's not credible. We have to take our time and bring forward policies that make sense, that people are going to trust in.
What do you make of this plan, these return hubs across the EU? We're talking this morning about Kosovo, Britain asking Kosovo to take small boat migrants and rejected asylum seekers. What do you make of this plan? Will it work to stop the small boats?
Well, I know people were very frustrated that we didn't get the Rwanda plan operational as quickly as we would have liked, as I would have liked. But we did have in place a plan with a third country to take migrants as a deterrent, which even the National Crime Agency has said is vitally important. So whilst I welcome any efforts to create an alternative deterrent, which Labour still have not done, what they should have done is make an attempt to operationalise and use that Rwanda policy that we had in place. A key difference between what Labour have talked about doing and what we plan to do, we plan to say, if you come here, you go to a third country and they process your asylum claim. What Labour have talked about, in my understanding so far, is taking people to be processed somewhere else. There are real disadvantages to that approach because they're still caught up in all of the law and the processing that we have to run, just being done elsewhere. The benefits of the Rwanda approach was that it would have been the Rwandan government making the decisions about who did or didn't secure asylum. I think that's the better approach. It's the more reliable approach. And I really do regret, out of all the things that Labour have U-turned on, whether it's taxes on hardworking people, taxes on farmers, taxes on schools, all these things that they've done that are so damaging, I wish the one change they would have made was to make an attempt to get that Rwanda policy working. It worked for Australia. The same approach. Australia said, if you come here, we'll take you somewhere else and you don't get to stay. Okay. They saw more than a 90% drop in crossings. We could have had that same result here, I think.
Yeah, and finally, just back to that prison overcrowding problem. People like Lucy Connolly are in prison for what many describe as free speech. At the end of the day, there's a lot to be desired in terms of policies on this one. The Tories obviously didn't change any of these laws while they're in power. Do you think your party is partially culpable for people like Lucy Connolly being in prison when you could have at least loosened the reins on free speech laws while you're in office?
Well, I think that there is complexity to Lucy's case beyond just a free speech issue. There are always restrictions on what people can say when it comes to inciting violence. I think what we have seen is an overly harsh interpretation of whether or not she should be allowed visits, etc. That's what I think we've looked at in detail. I wouldn't go so far as to say anyone's individual conviction was wrong, but it is true to say I understand why people do get frustrated when those sorts of cases seem to be dealt with particularly harshly. But as I've said, at the same time, rapists, paedophiles, people that kill people are going to be let out of prison even earlier under Labour. That's a real public confidence issue, and I understand that.
But Mr Mullan, what does it say about free speech in this country when we've got reports this morning that President Trump and the US State Department are examining the treatment of Lucy Connolly?
Recognise that we have concerns around free speech, and actually you remember whilst we were in government we were working on legislation particularly in universities to make sure free speech was protected. Labour came in and scrapped that really important work. There's another example of things that we were trying to deliver on and Labour have taken a step backwards. As I said, individual cases are always tricky to use as a basis for changing law and policy. I do understand people's concerns around that, particularly as I've said in light of the decisions Labour is taking when it comes to very, very serious violent offenders.
OK.
Kieran Mullan, good to see you this morning. Thank you for your time.